Hi, it's social studies time, third graders, and today I'm going to teach you about a little larger measurement of time. Because when we're talking about social studies from now on, we're going to be talking about history. Now, you know a lot of things about time. You know that it's 60 seconds makes a minute, 60 minutes makes an hour, 24 hours makes a day, 7 days make a week, about 31 days make a month, about 365 days in a year, and now we're going to go a little farther than that. So, first thing I want to show you is a poster that I found, and I'm going to send this to you. At the top, it's got the things that you know about minutes, hours, days, weeks, month, years. 1 year equals 12 months, 365 days. A leap year is 366 days. But this is the part we're going to talk about today for social studies, because in history, you use a longer period of time usually than even a month. So we're going to talk about this part here right now. Okay, so the first word we're going to discuss about in time for social studies is the word decade. You may have heard the word decade before from people. How many decades have I been doing? I've been doing this, my job, for 2 decades. I've been a teacher for 2 decades. Maybe I'll get to 3 decades, I'm not sure. Now, what's a decade, you might say? Well, let's take a look at your chart. It says a decade is 10 years. So if I've been doing my job for 2 decades, 2 tens, so that would be 20 years. Some people have been doing their job for 3 decades, maybe 4 decades. That's a long time. That would be 40 years. Now I want to show you another thing that we talk about. This is my mom and dad, and this is Devin. This was on a Thanksgiving time. Now you know my mom has passed away, and she was 81 when she passed away. So she would have lived for 8 decades. 81. My dad right now is 87. He has lived also for 8 decades, but he's on his way to 9 decades. And if he gets far enough, he's going to go on to something, even greater measurement than a decade. And here it is. He might live on to be 100, and then he would have lived a century. So if you go back to our poster, century says 100 years. A century. We talk about that in time, in history. What century was the car invented? What century did people go to space? You talk about years then. Was it the 25th century? The 13th century? All right. So my dad could possibly live a century. If he does live to be 100, they call people who live to be 100 centenarians. And you can see that comes from the word century, C-E-N. Centenarian is someone who's lived 100 years or longer. Now, I'm kind of doubting that any of us are going to make the next word in years. Millennium. You've heard this one before, millennium. Okay, let's check our poster, and it's what you think it is. A millennium is 1,000 years. So, will we make it to the next millennium? Do we live for a whole millennium? I don't think we do. Millennium. We are actually in the 3rd millennium now. Because our year is 2020, we are in the 3rd millennium, and then when it gets to 3, then it'll be the 4th millennium that we're living in. Millennium is every 1,000 years. Century is every 100 years. And decade is every 10 years. Now, your assignment today I have sending you the poster so that you have that for reference. On Epic, I'm going to be sending you a book, and it's called What Decade Do You Belong In? So, what decade do you belong in means what year are your habits or is your style like? It's kind of a fun little book. You just take a notebook and write your answer down and then see what decade you're going to end up in. This would be something like you have a lot of traits that would put you in the 1950s. That would be like when you were in kindergarten and Mrs. B and Mrs. Minch and Mrs. West did poodle skirts and Back to the 50s day. Or maybe you would be someone from the 60s or the 70s. I was born in the 60s, the 1960s. You were born in, oh my gosh, you were born in the 2010s, 2000 teens. I don't even know what you would call it. Okay, so check out that book and let me know what decade you came out on that little quiz. It's fun. It's not going to be graded. It's just for fun. The other thing I would like you to do for me is find something that you can tell me how old it is in decades. You can't do yourself because you're not 10 yet. I don't think any of you are 10 yet. So find something that you can measure in a decade. Your dog might be a decade, or your cat might be a decade. Your parents definitely are one or two. I bet they're 2 decades at least. And I'm not going to tell you how many decades I am. But I'm not here yet. See if you know anything that is the age of a century or longer. Anything that you know of that's 100 years or older. Do you have some furniture that's an antique furniture? Do you know of any antiques at all? Or have you ever met anyone who lived for a century? Let me know. And then the last one, I don't think you know anything that's lasted for a millennium. That's really long. 1,000 years is a long time. But those are all terms you need to know for studying history. So hopefully that gives you a good start. And write me and tell me what you think. Tell me what terms that you can measure in, like if you found something with decades or centuries. And also let me know how you came out on that quiz. Okay, talk to you later.